So in terms of developing your monitoring plan, it's important to consider all compliance aspects, both programmatic and fiscal. Taking a comprehensive approach and looking at all of the information provided by the intermediary to develop the monitoring plan. For example, supporting documentation provided with fiscal reports, you might want to just spot check on site if you've already received the detailed information when you're making payments. This will allow you to be more efficient with your compliance process, not double checking things that you've already reviewed. There are many approaches that may depend on the intermediary staff and organizational capacity. Some site visits are conducted by one individual that reviews both the program and fiscal components, whereas others, due to staff expertise, have two different components, where some things may be done on site and some things may be done remotely. Most important is that your plan is an approach that works with the staffing that you have and the subgrantees that you need to support. Next slide. When developing your monitoring plan, there's several items to consider, and we suggest you build these into your risk-based approach. First, think about the frequency of your monitoring activities, taking account that your policies and procedures that are in place at your organization. What time do you have to conduct these reviews? Again, making sure that you've budgeted adequate time in your schedule. What's the location or distance of your subgrantees? Again, this will be a time component as well as a budget component in terms of the cost to support the desired activities. This is going to differ by grantee, as you all have different aspects in those areas. Next, think about what the type of monitoring that's best. In person, desk audit, or a virtual review. Sometimes it's helpful to have subgrantees submit information. You can review that and then follow up with them either via email or on site. So some people do a hybrid type visit. Again, the type of visits you'll conduct will be based on your geography, staffing, your budget. Ultimately, that's your monitoring plan. One critical element of all types of visits is preparation. It's critical to be prepared before monitoring, especially if you're going to invest the time to go on site. Piece of preparation is to review the financial, programmatic reports that have been submitted and provide a lot of information and operations on the subgrantees. Next slide, please. When creating your monitoring tool and during your actual monitoring activities, there are several areas that you need to review. An important underlying principle is that your monitoring systems and policies, which the subgrantee organization has developed, which will ensure overall compliance, not that just one aspect has been completed properly. Again, looking at systems, policies, forms, documents will allow you to look at the internal control environment within the subgrantee. The internal controls provide the structure so that when reviewing a single sample document, you'll have some assurance that all documents that are similar are processed in a similar manner. Yes, you also monitor and view the actual documentation, and you want to consider looking at the developing systems. Again, looking at efficient and consistency. Looking at the organization to ensure that the leadership supports the program, management has allocated adequate staff with appropriate experience to manage the subgrantees, and overall that the organization has the capacity to make sure that they're following all of the SIP regulations and requirements. Again, take a look at their policies and procedures around documentation, records retention, and how these are implemented. This is especially critical when looking at National Service criminal history checks. Next slide. Financial management is one of the content areas to monitor. Again, the reviewer should focus on systems and policies prior to reviewing individual transactions. With well-developed written policies, you can rely on the information being consistent. Reviewing the policies and procedures for compliance is more easily completed off-site. So again, this is something that you may want to have your subgrantees send prior so that you have the proper time to review the details. Then you could review sample documents, timesheets, forms while you're on site. You will want to ensure that the accounting system tracks appropriate information. Some ideas to do this might be to choose one monthly report, ask for a report out of the general ledger that supports all the expenses, including the match. In addition to reviewing what information is tracked by the accounting system, you could also ask for the individual documentation to support that. Again, if you've already reviewed this information prior to making a payment, I'm not saying to duplicate it, but I'm saying that this is a good idea as a practice. Internal controls encompass many aspects: the policies and procedures, the separation of duties. While on site, you want to make sure that more than one person is involved in any one process, whether it's processing payments, collecting cash, reconciling bank statements, to name a few critical components. Lastly, since payroll is typically one of the large budget items, you want to make sure that timesheets are reviewed to make sure that they have the appropriate time and activity documentation, paying particular attention to staff that work less than full-time on the SIF grant, because time tracking in that case is a little bit more challenging. Next slide, please. As mentioned earlier, grantees are required to monitor subgrantees for compliance, including programmatic components. It's critical to monitor progress on performance. Reviewing information from the evaluator might be a really good way to get a sense of compliance in terms of overall programming, as well as examining progress on raising the match. As mentioned previously, some organizations separate the fiscal and programmatic compliance. This works for many due to the different staffing patterns and expertise, where others choose to combine their resources, particularly if the site requires consistent distance. There is no right process. The critical part is that you're reviewing all of the information and identifying support and monitoring for what works from you. Next slide, please. Preparation prior to the visit, as I mentioned previously, will maximize the time and effectiveness on site. It's really helpful to send the tool ahead so that subgrantees can familiarize themselves with the information that's to be expected. Again, this is an open book test where you want them to be successful. Another tip is to notify subgrantees of what staff needs to be present while you're on site. You might want to talk to various levels of staff that work on the SIF grant. But don't forget to review the information that you have on hand. Checking reports for timeliness and accuracy is helpful. Checking with other staff within your organization that work on the SIF that might have an interaction. Again, trying to get the whole picture of what's going on with the subrecipient. Again, a checklist for policy documents or forms prior to the visit is helpful. And don't forget to take time to meet with staff within your organization and evaluate the intersections of the subgrantees to gather a holistic picture. Next slide. So, post-visit, now that you've collected all the information, you need to take some time to write up your findings and impressions of your monitoring activities. It's helpful to provide constructive feedback on what you reviewed, clear instructions on what the subgrantees must respond on, and what is just information or feedback. So when you're providing your feedback, you want to include both best practices and challenges. You also might even on site ask your subgrantees on an exit conference what support or training would be helpful. So during your monitoring activities, you probably noted items or systems for continuous improvement, things that might function better if implemented differently, but not necessarily incorrectly. This might be something that you might want to share either verbally or as a continuous improvement item. If you identify promising practices on site, it's a great idea to ask if they'd be willing to share it with others. Again, creating a library of forms and tools at work will be helpful for all of your grantees within your portfolio. And the information collected will also allow and inform your training and technical assistance plan. As you monitor your portfolio, I'm sure that you'll come up with some themes and areas that are consistent. Those are ones that you might want to do additional training. There might be some isolated items that you might want to do some individual coaching or support. And you'll identify some subs that are stronger that might be able to provide some peer support to each other. So again, in the report, make sure that you indicate what's non-compliant and requires follow-up, as well as kind of what are just continuous improvement feedback that does not require a written response. Clarity is really crucial in this point.